Hey everyone, I think I got it to work. If you can hear me okay, volume is good. I appreciate some feedback in the chat. Just let me know if you can see me okay and if you can hear me all right. Oh, okay, that's a lot of emojis. I'm gonna take that as I'm coming across okay. Let me just make sure my mic settings are all good. Yeah, okay. All right, guys. Well, thank you all for coming, and apologies for the slight delay. We have an hour on the clock, and so let's just get right into it. The last stream I did was in May of this year, I think, so it's made it. I forgot how to turn the stream back on, but I got it now. It's pretty easy to figure out. So the typical format for this is basically, I think, mostly Q&A, I want to say, but I try to split it, half half, where the first half I kind of talk a little bit about, some upcoming features at Lofty, overall, like what is our company doing, what is our team focused on. A lot of that doesn't get communicated across if we're just sort of working on these things in the background. So I think it's cool for you guys to get an update and see what we're up to. And then obviously, the rest is going to be just I open it up for questions. You can post them in the um, live chat here, and I will sort of just go through them and answer them in order typically. And obviously, if I get to a question that I don't know the answer to, I will just tell you that I don't know the answer to it. I'm not going to make something up on the spot for you guys. And hopefully, I'll try to record them all, and this meeting is recorded as well. And then I'll go in and try to find the answers for you guys. And yeah. Uh, and basically get back to you on those. So that's pretty much the format for these things typically. So just starting off, I think um, we're currently at a point which is pretty close to the end of the year. And what we always do at Lofty is, we are pretty ambitious, and there's like a bunch of things we always want to build every single year. And for one reason or another, things come up. Like there was a period where we did the Oracle price adjustments early this year, and people seemed to really like them initially, and but then it basically led to, I think, some bugs with the staking, where essentially people were getting more LP tokens than money that they were putting in, and essentially, gave them an unfair advantage, and they could sort of just mint free money. So we had to sort of drop everything and obviously focus on that and fix that. And also, people who have lost money there, when it is, something that we messed up on, we do a remediation where we pay out, any funds lost into these pools and things like that. So things like that come up sometimes throughout the year, and that prevents us from doing the full cycle of feature updates that we would like to do. So essentially, at the end of the year, we call it end of the year sprint, and that essentially is when the team sort of just goes heads down. We try not to focus on too many other things that could be distracting. And literally, there's going to be 5 or 6 features that we really wanted to roll out this year, and we do nothing except for working on those things until the end of the year. And the goal is to ideally, take all of the sprint work and actually release them before the end of the year, for you guys. And so you've seen some of those come out recently. So a lot of the PM updates, that was one of them. The limit order interacting with market orders, that was one of them. The historical yield charts, that's another one. And so we have some more UI components coming out. That's going to be based on like the historical data. So we're going to be able to show you, without you manually calculating it yourself or looking at the yield chart, the average full historical yield of a given property. And so you can imagine, if a property's been on the platform for 4 years, 3 years, 2 years, a decent period of time, you're going to have a much more stable yield number. One of the biggest complaints we've heard over the years is that, you know, the cash flow changes from month to month, and our platform automatically annualizes them. And so people will come in, see a really high yield, get really excited, purchase that, invest in that asset, and 2, 3 months later, an expense comes up, or tenant doesn't pay, or Airbnb can be seasonal, and then they'll be like, oh my god, like am I really getting only 5% now for the rest of the time? And it's like, no. If you look at the historical data, when you average out the seasonality, you're still getting a decent return, but yes, not as high as you originally thought. And so by having that historical number in there, we think will really help people make their decisions, especially new users who might not know the inner workings of the platform as much. So that's going to be one of them. Another one that we're pretty excited about, and we'll see how people view this. It's just based on feedback. Is right now the token prices sort of don't anchor to anything. Like especially if you're new to the platform, um, you look at something and it says like $35. What does that actually mean? Is it a good deal at the moment? You don't really know. And the data is out there. You can dig through all the reports, you can look at all the historical governance updates, to kind of figure out, run your own comps and things like that, and figure out, hey, is the property, in my opinion, worth more or less? But you can imagine that's a ton of work. There's a ton of properties on the platform. I know Lofty Assist is out there and it helps users do some of this stuff, but still, it's just not the most efficient way. We want to add in more helpful data to sort of do some of that work for you. And so we're essentially going to be adding in sort of indicators and pre-calculating the property's value on the token purchase screen. So right now, you can imagine when you go to a property, you'll just say some number like $50.18, right? Again, that doesn't really mean anything. What we're going to do is take the total supply of the property and ahead of time multiply it by the current token number, and generate the actual property's price of like, hey, this property is essentially at $530,000. And then separately, we are going to take the our best estimate, and we use third parties for this because we don't want to go in and price these assets for you. You probably don't want us to do it either. Is to go in and have a third party tool like an AVM system. And we don't use house canary anymore, just so everyone's aware. So we're going to update the copy around that. But we're going to use AVM and essentially sort of the Oracle, the new adjusted Oracle price algorithm. And we're going to do another calculation, which is based on like ideally as good of a guess as you can get for the sort of meat space value of the property, another number. And so you can just see in contrast, like this property is potentially worth, $503,000. And right now, at this current token price, it would be equivalent to buying it at $430,000. Or, sometimes it might be overvalued. Like, hey, this is equivalent to buying it at $600,000. And it just should hopefully make opportunities and like more clear for people. And the reverse would also be true. If something might be overpriced, like that's a good way to let people know ahead of time, like, hey, that's something you probably want to look at. So yeah, that's one that we're really excited about. And then there are some more sort of automations that we want to roll out. We Essentially, there's a lot of staking number, like there's no automated restaking. So when you stake and you earn yield, it does not automatically compound. So your yield goes to a separate rewards wallet. You have to manually claim that. And if you don't, let's say you just check out the platform, which a lot of our stakers do because they don't have to manage it nearly as much as managing an actual property, you might come back and then you essentially missed out on a bit of compounding for that month. And so we're going to have it by default turn on so that whatever yield you're getting in a pool, it's automatically going to restake your rewards back into that existing list of pools that you're already staking in, because that's likely your preference. And we might also add in something where you can like manually control, like these are the pools I want to restake into, these are not. And then you can obviously opt out of that, right? If you don't want to automatically restake. But we think that will allow people to compound more. And on top of that, it will help with the liquidity on the secondary market as more of the USDC will flow back into the pools, providing liquidity for people. So those are, yeah, just some of the sprint work that we want to get in. But the most, and those are relatively, I wouldn't call them easy, but they're sort of like smaller features, right? Um, the one I'm personally obviously most excited about, and I've hinted at this a few times now, is we're hoping, I can't promise because we are pretty tight on time, that we're able to launch the first iteration of the lending platform before the end of the year. That's sort of one of the stretch goals. Um, that we're wanting to roll out. And lending is going to essentially have two features that we're building currently. And one is easier and it's going to release first, and the other one is extremely complicated to pull off and relies on a lot of sort of business development negotiations on behind the scenes. And I'll shed a bit more light on this in a bit. But the first one we're going to roll out is basically allowing you to use the equity in your existing properties as collateral. And you'll be able to borrow USDC at either a fixed or variable rate. And this is going to launch with a DeFi or decentralized finance approach where there's going to be a universal lending pool and you can just deposit USDC in it. And the pool will automatically allow people, will authorize which assets are, able to be used as collateral. When this first rolls out, not every single asset is going to qualify. We're going to select the ones with the highest amount of liquidity, and the one that has been sort of most consistent in sort of performance and yield and things like that. Essentially, the best properties you have on the marketplace. And the idea is basically, you could put up, let's say, $40,000 worth of one of these properties tokens equity, and dynamically the risk engine will price things and basically say, hey, you can, based on the available funds, you can borrow 15,000 dollars like worth of USDC from the pool at a 6% interest rate, right? And in exchange, you have to lock up your equity tokens. But the one cool thing is, while your equity tokens are locked up, we're going to make it so that you still earn your rental income from that. Because unless you're liquidated, you're technically still the owner, at least in the meantime. It's just that you cannot, access those tokens. You cannot move them around freely anymore, but you should be getting the rental yield. And so for some of you, the yield you're sort of getting from that loan in many cases can actually help offset the interest. And so it'll make it a pretty good borrowing instruments for a lot of the folks, especially I think the sellers on the platform, because they don't always sell all the equity they have available. So the other equity that they're intending to keep, they can use that to borrow. And obviously, if you default or if the collateral of your property decreases in value significantly, then what will happen is you'll get liquidated. You'll get a warning before that happens. We may even like build this so that you can input your text phone number so that you can get a text, because ideally people don't get liquidated, so you can get updated in real time. You'll either have to deposit more collateral or pay back your loan. And essentially, if you get liquidated, the proceeds would then be used to pay back the loan to the pool. And unlike existing, pools for liquidity for trading, this universal pool, there's only going to be one. So it's just one pool. Everyone can deposit into this one, and it's going to make loans against all the different borrowers. And it will not have any penalty fees. So it's fully liquid. You can withdraw at any time you want. And the yield will be essentially variable. So when there's a lot of borrowing demand and there's not enough supply, sometimes you see these pools, they'll skyrocket to like 30% yield, 60% yield, something like that. When there's, relatively speaking, enough supply versus demand, the yield might stabilize at something like 7 or 8%. But you sort of get the gist of that idea. So that's something we're hoping we can just roll out by the end of the year. And we hope you guys love that feature. We think it provides people a lot of optionality. And especially for the sellers, I think a lot of you will then be able to get a better cost of capital than you otherwise would from hard money lenders. And I think that's going to be pretty huge, for like the sellers on the platform. So that's one. The second lending feature is a lot more ambitious, and I've hinted at this one as well. It's basically what we call mortgage 2.0. Right now, there are no mortgages for fractional real estate. It's a financial instrument that does not exist today. You can get a mortgage for the underlying house, but then the problem with that is, how do you underwrite a group of borrowers where, let's say, you have 40 owners in a property and there's a single mortgage? Who do you underwrite as the lender, right? On top of that, it doesn't give people a lot of choices. So if you're someone who, for example, we have some, Muslim investors who cannot participate in deals that have leverage on them. And so if everyone's levered up, they just can't participate in that deal, period. So it decreases the liquidity of that property, trading, less demand for the seller. Overall, pretty negative because of that, like non-flexibility being in there. But what we envision is that, the underlying property will actually not be levered up, but the loan will be moved to the LLC level against the actual shares or the tokens of the LLC. So the property itself will be 100% cash based. But let's say, you, like person A, comes in and you have 800 FICO, blah blah blah. There's some good indicators about your traditional credit history. Plus, we're able to see insight into how much collateral you have in your wallet on Lofty, how much USDC you hold, how much rent you're earning, what properties you hold, what are they worth, today. So we're able to underwrite you essentially in a much better way. And you'll come in, and at the time of the checkout, when you're buying tokens, it will automatically give you an offer to say like, hey, if you want to lever up on this, if you want to borrow, essentially take out a micro mortgage for this purchase, you're able to do that, and it will quote you dynamically an interest rate. And then it'll let you do something like, hey, I'm going to buy 200 tokens, but I'm going to only put down the cash for 20 of them, and I'm going to borrow the rest. Like that might be an extreme example. I don't know if you'll be able to like extend that much leverage, but anywhere you can probably imagine 50% loan to value all the way up to something that's more traditional, like 80%, right? And then if you choose to take on that loan, you're siloed in the risk. You're the only one that took on that mortgage. Literally every single other owner, if they're not comfortable with that, are doing all cash based investing. And so this way, let's say hypothetically you default, the DAO doesn't lose the underlying property because it's all held in in a mortgage, right? And so it's not held in a mortgage; it's held cash based only. So you, as the borrower, get liquidated based on the collateral you have, and then that liquidation will automatically, sell those collateral on the market, get the USDC, and give it back to the lender so that they can immediately re-lend, right? And the capital is recycled. And so you can imagine this at scale becomes pretty powerful and pretty unique. So for the first time, you'll be able to actually take on a mortgage at the LLC level with fractional real estate. But you'll also get the flexibility of, being underwritten solely by yourself and not be affected by your co-owners. So if you have 800 FICO and a lot of collateral, you might be getting like 8% hypothetically, like fixed rate. Someone else who might have 600 FICO and less quality collateral might still be able to lever up as well, but they might get a lower loan to value and their interest rate might be 10% or 12% or something like that. So you can see that you're not negatively impacted by your co-owners, right? And your risks aren't correlated either in that sense. But long term, the reason why we're really interested in that feature is because from the lender's perspective, they essentially have no risk or very, very little risk to the principal compared to traditional real estate. So imagine a mortgage, you underwrite one person on the property, and it's a static underwriting. Like at the time you get an appraisal for the house. Let's say someone defaults 5 years into the mortgage. I mean, is the house still worth that money? Like originally, like if the markets have shifted, right? Then you have to go through this entire process to, you know, take back the property, and then most lenders auction it off and get pennies on on the dollars and all the legal expenses and time it takes. It's not a pleasant experience for them, and not a very efficient process. So by lending on Lofty, they don't have to do any work. The risk engine and the auto liquidation process will make sure that essentially their principal is pretty much always protected. And so, from a risk adjusted perspective, the pitch we have for these lenders is that long term you'll be able to see the data, but from a risk adjusted perspective, you're getting a higher rate of return um, for doing these type of loans at the LLC level for tokenized real estate than you would be for traditional real estate. And the hope is that with enough data, long term, you can convince these lenders to be like, so if this is a better product for you and much safer, your required rate of return on a risk adjusted basis should be a bit lower actually. And our hope is that continuously we'll be able to renegotiate these deals and essentially give you guys lower and lower costs of capital for these loans to the point that, I imagine this will take a lot more than a year or two. But long term in the future, the goal is you'll be able to get 30-year fixed rates on Lofty that is lower cost of capital than you would be if you were just buying a house out of Lofty. And for us, that's really exciting too, because we think that's a huge competitive advantage to onboarding like really good quality real estate. Um, because they might not be really interested in tokenized real estate. They might not be that interested in selling equity even. But the value is, hey, if you want to refi or if you want to get the best rate you can get on the market, you have to tokenize your asset and you have to do it on Lofty. And so that could potentially attract a lot of interesting supply coming onto the platform. And the main benefit of that kind of supply is, to a certain extent, real estate has an adverse selection piece to it, especially for investment properties, which is if something is such a great investment, why do you want to sell it, right? So one of the ways we try to counter that on the marketplace today is we don't let someone sell 100% of their equity, because that's a clear sign like, hey, you could just dump an asset and walk away and then you have like nothing to deal with. So we force them to hold on to at least 10% of equity. It's not perfect, as you guys all know, but it's something. I think it would be significantly worse if we didn't have that requirement in place. But that also kind of goes back to saying, like, if someone has the best asset, a really great investment or a really great deal, they may not want to sell it or any portion of it. They may not want to share that deal. So then by having leverage of like, hey, if you want the best rates and the best cost of capital, you have to tokenize your asset. And you have to let it be publicly listed. You don't have to list any tokens for sale, but people have to be able to view that asset. We could create an interesting dynamic where people will bring really good quality assets on the platform. You can then make offers on them. They might not take it, but who knows? Maybe they will as well, right? And then you can get into some really interesting deals that essentially are off market that you wouldn't be able to get into otherwise. So that's essentially the second debt feature that we're going to build. And obviously, as you've heard me talk about this, you know, like you'll see how that like takes a bit longer to build with the risk engine and all that stuff. And that's just the technology part. And the main part that's taking a long time is we're going to a lot of private real estate credit funds, and we're sort of pitching them and negotiating with them on like, hey, partner with us and lend through the platform. And the idea is essentially we're going to route from a borrower's perspective to the lowest cost of capital for you. So if the DeFi pool is offering a lower cost, you're going to borrow from there. And if the TradFi lender is going to offer you something, then at a lower cost is going to route you to them. So that competition hopefully again brings down cost of borrowing for you guys. And we're asking for quite a bit of money, so yeah, fingers crossed. Making some good progress there. But it's not like with these traditional lenders. The reason why we need them on the platform in the beginning is because if you think about real estate debt, very large numbers aren't actually that large. Like think about it from $100 million line of credit perspective, right? It sounds like a lot of money. It is $100 million, but let's say you're onboarding properties that are in sort of more in demand areas, and these properties are a bit more expensive, right? Um, like like think of like Palo Alto or Mountain View or something like where the demand is so high in those areas for home buyers, and also people wanting to live there because of the work to the various large tech companies and things like that, that you're always going to be able to rent it out to very high quality tenants with high income. um, like they might be worth 3 or 4 million dollars. And so if you don't have leverage on the platform, um, from a pure cash based perspective, let's say someone there wants to sell like $1 million worth of equity, there just wouldn't really even be enough liquidity to be able to absorb that, right? But real estate is fundamentally a debt driven product. And so or debt driven asset. And so it's completely normal, and it's sort of the standard for people to lever up on their purchases if the rate makes sense, right? And if the return makes sense. So let's say people leverage it up, then all of a sudden there very much is enough liquidity to absorb that. And from a liquidity pool perspective, from trading perspective, it's like, okay, there's not enough liquidity to absorb $1 million sale now. But if on the purchase side, people took up leverage and bought into it, then all of that additional USDC from the borrower is also in the liquidity pool. So it actually will be able to absorb sales of that size as well at that point. But we can start onboarding those type of properties, which basically up until now we've had to always turn them down, and it's been pretty unfortunate because a lot of them are like really interesting deals, really interesting assets that are pretty counter to what you see on Lofty today. And unfortunately we can't list them, right? So that's really exciting to see. And going back to the debt thing, like for those properties, if it's $1 million, that's realistically only 100 houses like that. And if those properties, which if you know these regions well, a lot of times they're worth a, a lot more than that. And so let's say it's a $5 million property and there's $2 million worth of equity, right? That's only 50 houses. So these lines are actually the reason they need to be pretty large just from the get go is that if we don't have that, we would probably run out of it pretty quickly. So yeah, that's something I'm working behind the scenes on. And obviously, traditional financial players move much slower. And I've been traveling around the world a lot. Like I'm basically going to family offices, private real estate fund, both Europe, in the U.S. and also Asia, like wherever these capital sources are. So that's why it's also been I've been very busy and occupied with that, going back and forth to these meetings. They're pretty traditional, so you kind of have to go in person. But yeah, that's sort of like a overall update for you guys on some of the features coming up and what we're really excited about building out as the next phase. So with that said, we're a little past you know 30 minutes at this point. But given that we had a little slow start, I think this is about the perfect time to turn it over to the Q&A. And I'll try to answer every question I can. But if there's a lot and we run out of time, then well, I'll try to get through them all. And again, this is just first come first serve. So I literally just scroll up and then I read through them all until the bottom. Okay, so let's see. Yeah, so first question I see is what are plans to reduce the likelihood of attracting or preventing rogue PMs given the Cal situation? I want the platform to have solid PMs like Earl and such. Agreed. I think we're 100% aligned there. That's one of our top priorities as well. A lot of what I talked about right now is on the tech side, feature side, because that's typically what I handle at Lofty. But Max is pretty much handling the real estate operations side of things. Um, from a tech perspective, one of the things we're going to build out is a much better sort of like PM bio page, like what you've seen on Airbnb. If you've taken a look at like the Superhost, for example, they'll sort of have this profile about them, and people can rate these hosts, and their entire collection of ratings and reviews will be on that profile. And then there'll be a list of every single property that they listed on Airbnb that like you can rent today. So on Lofty, it'll be very similar to that, where you'll get to rate these property managers. You'll be able to update your reviews, which is something that isn't possible right now. So we're going to enable that for you as well. And they get to introduce themselves, and then also you get to see every single property they currently manage on the platform. We might even add in a button for you to be able to like easily index or buy into like all of these properties if you really like that specific PM, right? So that's something on the tech side that will help sort of the platform navigate in a way where over time, as more evidence and sort of data comes out for various PMs, you can then pick who you think is the best one, who aligns with your investment strategy, who communicates in a way that you appreciate, things like that. And you can then really sort of start to nitpick who you want to sort of invest with, essentially. Um, but the other thing is, and we've sort of talked about this in Discord recently as well, is I think we're gonna just slow things down a little bit so that someone new who is unproven cannot just come in and like convince people to give them 70 properties on the platform to manage. Because one, because of the geography spread, we don't even think that's that realistic. Like they're going to need to rely on some local boots on the ground people. They're going to need to outsource to some other third party PM, and they're acting more as an asset manager. Um, so I think a lot of it is just going to be taking some time to observe the data and observe how people perform. And I think if you go back in hindsight, even with the Cal situation, if he was only allowed to manage like five properties from the get go, um, and then we watched that for a year or two. Maybe two is a little bit extreme, but at least maybe 6 months to a year. I think you guys would get a much better feel for whether you think long term they be a good manager and sort of let the ratings roll in, let the reviews roll in. So those two sort of work in tandem. Essentially, you want as much data as possible publicly so that people have an idea of how good a PM is on Lofty. And then you want to give enough time so that people can actually observe these PMs to be able to provide the data of like, hey, do we think they're good or bad? So that's something like right off the bat we want to be able to roll out like hopefully early next year. And then long term, we have some other ideas of, I think diversification is really key. Um, again, if you had 200 properties and there were 200 unique PMs, one for each property, um, you know, making it difficult for someone to be bad actor, on top of making it so that if someone was a bad actor, it would only impact like one property on the platform, as an example, right? Things like that would be very useful as well. And so we want to incentivize more owners to step up and start managing their properties. A lot of these co-owner properties are already like self-managing their property, and you can see many of them are doing quite well and been pretty consistent. I think the most boring ones are usually the best performers because just nothing really happens. They perform the way they've been advertised, and have been the most consistent. So and these sellers have just one property, so it's just them managing one property on Lofty. So we want to ideally see more spread and diversification, and so hopefully we'll have some incentive programs that we're thinking about where like maybe either revenue sharing or something like that, but we want to encourage people to be volunteer and put in the time and actually manage their assets for themselves and their co-owners. So I don't have anything concrete there, but that's something we're thinking about as well. And just as a full disclosure, if people weren't aware, we're already granting small amounts of equity in Lofty, like our actual company, to the existing PMs as well. So we issue them shares, and again, the goal is without directly paying them cash, we want to align incentives where like, hey, do a good job, be honest, be ethical, manage these properties well, and obviously Lofty will do well, and if Lofty does well and you're shareholders, you're going to do well long term as well, right? So those are some of the things we're thinking about. Um, Yeah, so then the next one is what's the situation with Everness and HRG money? How can we clear the balance and get properties back their money? How can users and PMs help accomplish this goal? So yeah, that's a great question and something that is sort of ongoing right now. Um, and I've written this in Discord as well, but just verbally, I would just repeat the same thing, which is that the way things are supposed to work when we set up everything originally in theory was that every property has its own unique bank account. And for some of the PMs, you'll have seen this because the bank you have to send money to from a sale, sale proceed, or where the OR funds are being sent to you are typically like they'll say something like Lofty Holding or like Eagle Dow 12345 LLC, right? So they're all segregated bank accounts. And once any money, whether that is rental income that is earned, any owner contributions from lending DAOs, any operating reserves, once it goes into that account, it means they're just naturally segregated from all the other DAOs. And that's how we've always maintained it. The issue, though, was when some of these property managers came to the platform and essentially offered to, manage portfolios for users on Lofty, offer these, you know, I don't know, like in hindsight, maybe they were sweet, maybe they were not sweet, like deals of, hey, if you turn over this large number of properties under one portfolio to us, we'll give you these fee discounts. You'll talk to like our institutional team instead of the retail mom and pop team, blah 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 blah. And again, at the time of the vote, when owners were choosing which PMs to select for these, this was all disclosed to them. They saw the pros and cons of each and what deals were being offered. But it required the PM to sort of have a master, agreement for the property management, instead of having like 100 different separate PM agreements with each of the DAOs. But we were very clear with them from the front that like, hey, these are independent properties. You can offer them these, and you can onboard a whole portfolio at the same time, just to sweeten the pot for you. But you need to like keep their accounting separate. And they're like, yeah, that's fine. And we receive owner statements. Our team looks over them each month, and that does appear to be the case. But it turns out from their end, the PM always touches the money first. They're the ones that actually collect it from the tenant, right? Like the tenant doesn't directly pay to the DAO's bank account; they pay it to the property manager first. So they always touch the money first. Well, it turns out whatever accounts they're holding there, they're clearly not segregating them for all the DAOs. They're like collecting rent to probably all one account, and then they do internal accounting and do owner statement. And when they send money over to the DAO's individual bank accounts, they send them separately. But what's happened over the years is there are like disputes on certain things, and to be honest, like we're not a fan of these PMs. I think many of you aren't either. There are things that they've done that just they don't disclose, which is quite literally their job, right? An example of that will be, if there's a large repair expense or something that is completely optional, they have to let us know first so that we can send a governance update to the owners. And then the owners can go back and vote and say, hey, yes, we want to replace the furnace. No, we do not want to replace the furnace, things like that. In various instances, something similar like this has come up where these PMs will just have done the repair or done the replacement, and then they'll just send a bill, be like, "Oh yeah, like this cost $6,000," and we would basically say, "Well, like pardon my language, but what the fuck? Like, what's this, right? Like this is not nobody approved this." And they're like, "Oh well, too bad. We did it. You owe us $7,000 now." And obviously we're like, no, we don't. Like the DAOs do not. Nobody's going to pay you this. Like nobody authorized it. It's like a legal repair. It wasn't even urgent, because the property doesn't have a tenant and it's empty right now, right? And then like worst case, like the day the furnace got put in, like the next day it got stolen. So what does the owners even have to show for it? And we thought like that was that, and we threatened them. We're like, hey, you can't take money. If you do, we're gonna sue you. All this stuff. And later on, we find out that unbeknownst to us, until we catch it, they'll just send owner statements of like, oh, something something expense for a different DAO. Or like, well, what's this expense? And they're like, oh, well, this is when you guys didn't pay us for that maintenance expense from like 3 months ago for a completely different property. We're just going to take the money of the rent that was collected for the last month from this other property. And sometimes they'll send in the rent, and it's normal to hold some portion of it, right? Like there is an agreement for with these PMs that they hold on to a small portion of the DAO's money, and that portion is used for emergency repairs. Like if the pipe bursts and owners cannot be reached, like the governance vote will take at least a day. Like that is what they're supposed to use to do emergency repairs. And so it doesn't, it's not setting off red alarms automatically if this month the DAO earned $2,000 and they're like, hey, we're only going to send you 1,500 and keep 500 in our accounts, right? And we do the accounting and we say, sure, they kept 500, but there's no expense netted against that, so that's still your money, and that goes into the OR. And ultimately, they'll come back and be like, oh, those months of like reserves we held, yeah, they're gone. We use them for some expense. So that's essentially long-winded, context of what's been going on. And when we find out, we tell you guys, and now we're gonna have to deal with it. I think, how do we sort of do that? Which is, I think at this point, legal is probably the only way. There are just some unscrupulous companies with bad business practices, and I think they can just take advantage of people and nothing will happen to them. And I think we have to show them collectively that that's not the case. And so, what we've seen work, and I think I'm not going to announce it right now. Max will do it, but supposedly there are some funds being sent right now that previously were withheld and not given to owners, essentially stolen. So on Monday or Tuesday, we're going to see if these funds actually land, and whether they're telling the truth or not for some of these properties. And if they are, then we can say, threatening them with lawsuits, both from other owners of the properties and from Lofty, really does help, because obviously nobody really wants to deal with a lawsuit. And if they're getting, let's say they stole funds from 6 different properties or mix up the money or whatever's the case, and at least one owner, or maybe it's the same owner in the 6 different properties, do 6 different lawsuits from each of the DAOs, or like 6 different demand letters from each of the DAOs over to them. Plus, Lofty does one for each of the instances of bad action they've taken. Um, that's essentially like 12 lawsuits they have on their hand now, and they do not, in 99% of the case, want to deal with that. We'll just have to take it one step at a time. I don't know what happens right now, at least if they're not willing to, if they're not scared or intimidated by that approach. We may actually have to sue them. Honestly, I'm pretty upset about what some of these PMs are doing, and yeah, if it costs us capital, so what? We're profitable, so I mean, if it means I devote a portion of our profit each month that we ideally would spend on growth and user acquisition towards suing really bad actors, like sure, like why not? But hopefully, just the threat of demand letters and lawsuits from multiple parties, multiple owners, multiple DAOs, and from Lofty, sort of puts these people, into the right lane again. So we just kind of have to do that one by one. But I know I ideally would like to snap my finger and have this all be resolved in one day. But I think from some of the announcements you guys have seen, like over time, they are in most cases being resolved one by one. It does just unfortunately take a lot of time, and I hope on Monday or Tuesday we'll have some good news for you guys. Someone asked, where can the yields or performance reports be found? So they're not reports, like a document. If you go to the property page, you're going to see a chart when you scroll down of the, trading, the historical prices, things like that. And there's a toggle at the top. One says price and one says yield. So if you click on the yield chart, you're going to see a different chart. And that chart is basically the monthly yield that the property was generating ever since it launched on the platform. So if it's been here since 2021 and you click all, which expands the timeline, you'll be able to see monthly yield going back to 2021. And so that is a much better figure where like if you can say the average yield for the last 4 years was 9%, then even if this month is fluctuating, it goes to zero or it goes to you know 15%, you can expect long term like it's probably going to remain close to 9%. So that really I think helps you underwrite the deal a lot better. Let's see. Next one. You have owned 30 properties over the years and none ever made a penny in profit. Can they be statistically tracked versus all other properties on the platform? Um, we don't have an index at the moment, um, but that is a good question. We have thought about building like an index of just the aggregate, like what is if you bought one token in every property since launch, what does that portfolio look like, factoring in yield over time, and also price adjustments. And then hopefully, you generate two numbers from that, and you already have an account overview, so you would be able to compare the two. I don't have an exact date on when we're going to roll that out, but it was sort of coincide. We always wanted an easier sort of one-click diversification tool where people just click and they're like, I don't. Unfortunately, we do get those users. I don't think it's great. My recommendation is you do actually pick which properties you want to invest in, as you should. But diversification helps as well. So if you put in, you one click a button and now you're sort of like in this index because your fund just gets split evenly across the board. That could be a good product for some users who just don't want to spend as much time doing the research. So it would probably coincide with that. We would come up with the index first and then come up with a way for you to invest in the index if possible. Um, all right, let's see what the next one is. One second. Oh, there's a lot of discussions that aren't actually questions, so sorry for the small text. I have to look closer. uh, oh, that can't be it. There has to be more questions. Sorry, guys. One sec. Let's okay. So next one, considering Lofty's history of operational problems, how are you expecting to implement complex lending products in a smooth way? Additional staff, bringing on experts. Well, so these aren't like traditional loans in the sense that, so they're more like over collateralized loans, right? So you have a collateral supporting your borrowed amount. And because there is a liquid spot market, this collateral can be liquidated instantly. So really the underwriting is just going to be on the individual borrower's traditional creditworthiness. So your FICO score, if you're from the US, will be considered. And then also really just the quality of your collateral. And the idea is basically, if you borrow $10,000 and your collateral is worth $50,000, there's a huge buffer in there. And should it get anywhere close to not being enough to support it, you would get warnings and then you would be liquidated. And then the funds would go back to the borrowers automatically. And from a regulatory perspective, these are not actually mortgages. Our lawyer tells me to not use the word mortgages at all, but it can be a bit hard to explain to people what it actually is. So unfortunately, mortgages is sort of the best analogy. But because they are at the LLC level where you're pledging like LLC shares as collateral. Um, let's see. The best way to phrase this is they're more like personal loans against personal property, and so the like legal doc like the loan disclosure that like you're not getting that stack of paperwork that is 600 pages and you have to get a notary to, yeah, sign in front of them. The requirement just isn't that. So you'll sign using your wallet, there'll be an agreement, you'll see ahead of time, and then, sort of like how you sign for your DAO operating agreement today, it will be similar to how you sign for the loan today. So really it doesn't require any additional staff. Maybe on the tech side, which, we're always hoping to staff more on the tech side, have more developers. But yeah, that there's no like actual manual operating work that is going to coincide with these features. It's going to be completely automated. And for those that have used lending pools, it's even more so. Like if you go on Folks Finance today, or you go on any lending pool and you want to lend your Bitcoin, right? Like, hey, I have some Bitcoin I don't want to sell for tax implications, but I want to borrow against, say, use the money for something. It works mathematically in the same principle. And you'll know that there's not a ton of paperwork, there's not a lot of back office operations that have to deal with that. All right, next one. Mhm. Let's see. Well, this is not really a question, but I'm just going to respond to it. Essentially, Tim is saying that my reasoning is not correct for people having lots of reasons for selling properties and mostly are irrational. That is probably true, but at the same time, you have to realize we're a pretty like small startup. Like we are not, Robinhood, we're not Coinbase. And so from a distribution perspective, if a seller is seeking us out and very specifically like, oh yeah, like sign me up, I want to do this, you know, i- it's not like your average person that's just like, hey, I'm tired of um, managing a rental property because I'm busy and I make more money from my like day job or my business or something like that, right? And I just don't want to deal with this headache anymore. And then they're selling that way. We're not going after these sellers actively in that sense. All right, I think the rest are mostly just discussions around debt and how they're working and who wants to lend to who. Zycor, how are you feeling on Leclerc refund or extension? I think most people will be happy to hear. I'm leaning more towards a refund, but I'm going to reach out to the seller regardless, just as a courtesy. And like I said before, it's probably unlikely we do it, but since it has been such a long time, but if we were to do it, it's not remotely going to be like, oh, let's extend it for another year. Let's extend it for 6 months even. It'll be something like, maybe if you're gonna pay back the Dell's like earnest money deposit or something like that, like we'll let you extend like 3 months or something like that. And there has to be something involved in the transaction. It's not just going to be like flat out like, oh yeah, sure, we don't really care. So yeah, I think a lot of people will be pretty happy to hear about that. All right, so I'll address another question by Tim, which is pretty pointed, but sure. Why won't you share each DAO's bank account statements? Um, the reason for that is essentially, honestly, like the goal for Lofty has been that we're going to essentially decentralize all of this away anyway. And right now, we're pretty busy and short staff. I just don't want us to be in the position of, oh yeah, let's just call Lofty out on anything and they have to show us proof. Like it's easy to accuse people in public, like, oh, you are a, scammer. You prove to us you're not, right? Like it's just, I don't know. Like honestly, it's hate me for it, but it's almost like a personal thing. There's actually no good reasons why we don't show it to you. We just don't want that to be a precedent. Like yeah, you guys are users on the platform, but if you look around, like literally every other competitor, everything out there, we are by far the most transparent. You get the most amount of data, and we're already more and more handing over more of the operations to you guys, right? And so you're already going to be able to see that data. Most of the PMs have been, decentralized at this point. We're never PMing any property. We've never been PMing any property, and we're already handing over the OR reserves to people for them to handle. And so it's just one of those things where like our team is literally sprinting because the old bank provider shut down all the DAO's bank accounts and they're no longer doing this. And we have to migrate all the banks. We have to do the monthly updates. There's a ton of ops things that we talked about with, you know, chasing back money from the PMs, maybe suing them, like the previous PMs, maybe suing them and things like that. Where focus and stress out enough as it is on that. And people are just coming in every 5 seconds, like, oh, show me this, show me that, show me this, show me that. Like, no, we're not going to do it. Um, like at this point, after all these years, like every time there's been an issue with Lofty, we've literally given our own money to our users. Like, oh, we messed up on this pool. Yeah, like this is a bug. It's on us. Here's the money back. So at this point, like with all these instances of us doing that, if you're still that uncertain, you're like, oh, I think like Lofty is a bad actor, then really just liquidate your shares. You like clearly do not want to be here and you don't need to be here. So I'm just gonna put it out there. I think I answered these questions. How are you gonna handle the operational burden of lending? I answered that already. So the other question, third one is I've seen a property go 5 months without sending rent to Lofty, but Lofty continued to pay the monthly rent to token holders. How do you support your claim that monthly reconciliation happens? So I've also explained to this about this in Discord before, and the way it works is that you get owner statement, and I will admit that we're not perfect. So there have been times in the past where you see something in an owner statement, and our team will record it in our reconciliation process. But in hindsight, what should also be done is obviously you check each of the bank accounts to match it against the owner statement, instead of directly going from the owner statement to our spreadsheet, which records everything. And for some periods in the past, that was not done that way. It is now done that way, as I've announced. So there were times when you would see an owner statement of $3,000 incoming rental income, being credited. And it's like, okay, great. The DAO has received rent, so rent will be continue to be paid out. And that happens multiple periods until one day someone does an audit and goes in and looks at the bank account and goes, oh, where are actually the rental income? It's credited, but it's not actually sent in. And this goes back to what I was saying about HRG and some of the OPMs. They retained funds and didn't actually send them into the DAO's bank account, but they credited it in the owner's statement. So things like that happen. And once we find out, the way reconciliation works is we immediately turn off rental income. We're not going to go back and claw back the rent. Again, this is one of these things that like, hey, sorry, we messed up on. So we're not going to like penalize you right now by saying, oh, those months of rent that were paid to you, shouldn't have, shouldn't have done that, right? So like so the funds aren't there, we turn it off, and there's a section in the reconciliation which is if Lofty for whatever reason, and in the past we've done this and we have announced it too, fronted money for any of the DAOs, just because it's something urgent, like insurance. Like there are times when I've talked about this insurance, the DAO doesn't have the funds to pay for it temporarily, even though it's like $300. We'll just pay that insurance because we don't want the policy to be canceled. As you guys have seen, sometimes that they really do come in handy. So situations like that, and that's where it gets recorded. Like, oh well, Lofty paid 3 months of rent or whatever, and eventually the DAO will pay us back. So there's a column called due to Lofty, which is money the DAO owes us, and those usually get cleared up and again, it's announced and shown to you guys in closing statements for the redemptions. If a property ever sells, or if the property, becomes cash flowing again, its operating reserves are good, and it starts paying out yield. We'll announce it and be like, hey, there's a small debt that you guys owe us, and so you need to pay back the debt now, something like that. And then sometimes we don't get the money back. And like I said before, ideally that doesn't happen because that's not really sustainable long term across all of these different properties. But in some cases, it is what it is. It's a learning process on our end, and we don't want you guys as our users, and in many cases early testers, to suffer for it. And so we end up just not ever getting that money back. So that's basically how that reconciliation will work. Uh, let's see. All right. I think we're running a little bit long, but the last thing I probably would just address is, uh, Tim's comment that the answer regarding the operational burden of lending seems short-sighted considering how well the LP goes and that is supposed to be automated. Well, the liquidity pools are automated, like the trading is automated. A lack of liquidity is something that like we unfortunately cannot control. Obviously, we hope to be able to attract more of that. But if the liquidity is not very deep, then unfortunately slippage will be high. Things like that. We're thinking about more, you know, um, unique things we can do on the tech side to make that better. One of the things is looking at concentrated LP. Um, so an example of that would be, let's say someone lists 1,000 tokens for sale. They would just put it on one side of the LP, and the only way to buy the tokens is to just buy them through the LP. So this way, whatever demand you have initially, let's say it was just $100,000, that whole amount will be in the pool. And so, in theory, at least, if 100% of every single owner wanted to sell through the LP, there's exactly enough liquidity to absorb that. And realistically, given the slippage that you'll see, there's actually going to be a surplus of liquidity left over. So things like that can really help the dynamics. But again, those aren't like legal paperwork or operational backends. If you're not happy with the LPs, these are sort of product based things. Um, and they're not something that like manually a person can fix by hiring someone to like record data or something like that. That's just not how these things work. And so for the loan, it's the same thing. It will be all automated, and you sort of just have to let free market dynamics take over. For example, if there's not a huge supply of liquidity for these loans, at least on the DeFi side, then the borrowing rates are just going to be very high. And so, people probably aren't going to borrow at 25% or something like that because they're going to have better alternatives, right? And if you're going to have an oversupply of liquidity, which is obviously a good problem to have, and I hope that ends up happening, the borrowing rates will be extremely low, and so you'll end up, you'll essentially end up, with very low borrowing rates. So like all of these things are automated and adjusting. Our team doesn't have to manually record any loans being extended and things like that. Now, if you're talking about bug fixes, obviously that's something that I think like is always going to happen, and we try our best to sort of optimize between speed of rolling out features that you guys want and sort of have suggested we do, and also rolling out something that is stable enough so that you guys can use it effectively. And again, we're not perfect. We make mistakes all the time. But same thing. Let's say we fucked up and you got liquidated when you shouldn't have. Guess what? We're going to pay you back for that because it's our fault, right? Something like that. So those things will unfortunately have to be processed manually because usually it just comes in a support ticket like, oh, I got liquidated when I shouldn't have, and like, some details here and there. And our team will have to investigate that and look into it. And unfortunately, like, I feel like our users think it's targeted towards them. And in 99% of the cases, it's not. There's a lot of like bad actors whenever you have a financial product. we're constantly being targeted for scams left and right, just like anything you can imagine. Like every penny you think someone could like possibly try to scam you for, we've been essentially the victims of that on the platform. And so when people come to us and say like, "Hey, you owe us money," or like this thing didn't work out, we're obviously going to have to spend the time to sort of look into it a little bit. And unfortunately, that is manual. So but I'm hoping this is more stable, and we're going to do more testing. We're going to have a beta testing session as well, where people can come into the platform and test early versions that other people don't have access to. And it's completely optional if you want to take that risk or not. But we're going to try to do as much testing as we can to roll out the most stable version that we can. Yeah. So I think uh, I think that's it. I think we're a little bit over. I'll answer. I think there's two more questions that kind of came in last second. Yeah. So um, when will we share the balances owed to Lofty from DAOs? Um, the reason that one is actually different why we don't disclose it, because there are times when, like I said earlier, we just don't ask for the money back. So we don't want to like disclose something, be like, you owe us $10,000, and then like people make decisions reacting to that. And sometimes that there's real financial consequences. They sell out of the property, whatever's the case. And then later on, we're like, oh, we're actually just not going to collect that. And then it's like these people made these decisions for nothing. So we don't really want to announce it unless we're actually intending to collect on it. And if we're going to collect on it, it is always going to be either, there's enough liquidity, like the property is sold or is about to be sold, or like it's performing again and the ORs are full and like everything's going well. And it's like, okay, you have surplus funds, like, we would like to be paid back for this if possible. So that's usually when we would announce it. The other one is also when we do transitions. So when we hand over the ORs, and like the ORs are the last thing financially we currently help you guys with, essentially. Uh, Once we hand them over to a PM, then it's like all on them at that point. We have no input insight into any of that stuff. So at that time of the transition, we give them the ledger that we record, and they'll see the numbers. So that's when we would sort of like, those are the two scenarios when we would tell people. Why are the AMMs turned off and limit orders left on for properties selling? Um, yeah, so I answered this before as well. We don't want people to arb the AMM pool last minute, because it's just very unfair to the liquidity stakers. And this kind of goes back to like, why isn't there enough liquidity? Well, people aren't going to stake if they're not actually, doing well. And one of the mechanisms by them doing well is that if the market prices tokens incorrectly, even if for the entire duration of a year someone had penalty fees and like negative redemption values from unstaking, and they stay in the pool. A lot of times at the time of sale, if a property is mispriced, they'll all of a sudden get a huge boost to the pool, and they'll end up on a net basis, profitable by a pretty good percentage. um, so that's like you know a good example of why we don't want the AMM to be working at that time. But we also previously turned off limit orders, but now I think we're probably going to turn them back on, because if you do want to trade, we totally understand why you would want to. Um, at least with limit orders, is not dipping into the liquidity pool at all. So if you want to make transactions like that, then that's 100% on you, and you're not sort of taking advantage of someone else last second. Like, we're not even worried about you arbing the pool if you do it early. What's really sort of annoying and not good for the platform is like the sale gets announced, or a PM announces the price in Discord before elsewhere, before everyone else gets the same update, and then people go in and arb it like that last second, almost risk free. So it's just that's what we want to avoid. So that's the reason. Um, when will Daniel Anderson get his account unbanned? I'm assuming this is the guy that, to my understanding, was originally removed because the Discord is actually for active Lofty users. We can't always enforce it 100% because we don't know who's who all the time. Um, oh yeah, Daniel Johnson. But you know, if you have the exact same username as your actual name and your email account, then we usually know it's you. And so if we monitor things from time to time and see people who don't hold any tokens, but they're there, yeah, we are going to remove them because the rule of that Discord is that it's for Lofty users only. We used to have some public ones, but we don't have them anymore. So you need to, own at least one token to be in that Discord. And so in his case, he told us that he does in fact own tokens. Um, which is strange because we checked this account before removing him. So obviously something's going on there. So I told him, look, sorry, but this is not the highest priority given everything that's going on right now. But I will investigate for you. I'll figure out like, is there a bug in our system? Why are we showing that when in your wallet you hold the tokens? But we'll figure it out. And when we do, we'll reinstate you. And that apparently wasn't good enough for him. So pretty much every day since then, he's been spamming me, and I think, at this point, he's written, I think his last communication was he wrote us a thread of, hey, if you don't reinstate me in Discord, I'm going to write this terrible review about you and Lofty. And honestly, if you're asking someone to reprioritize and look into your problem before all the other ones, because you deem yours more urgent, I don't think threatening someone is the best approach. So his ticket, as I told him in his email communication, we queued up already for the team to look at. We do them first come, first serve. There's a bunch of queued up tickets. And so as we go through the list, eventually when we get to his ticket, we'll, look at the problem and resolve it. Until then, I mean, honestly, not a huge fan of him at this point, given that his behavior has been pretty, in my opinion, unreasonable and childish. So yeah, uh, let's see. Arbitrage does make efficient market, but you should do it while the property is actively trading and actively listed. It's not really an efficient market if you know before anyone else that, oh, the tokens are trading at $19, but I could redeem at $30. That's not efficiency. You're not helping the market at that point. So yeah, I think that's the last one, and we will end it here. Thank you everyone for coming. I think I got through most of the questions, and I hope I got through the bulk of the questions with the slight late start and the little bit of extra time we added in at the end. I think this is right around an hour. Again, I will try to do these more consistently if I can, but as you guys know, this whole summer it's been quite chaotic with all the stuff going on, and so I think we'll definitely be able to do one next month in December. So you have my word on that. But yeah, thank you everyone for spending the time and asking questions and chatting. I hope I've been able to answer them all. And if I missed any, there is always Discord. You can also, and I'm not in there as frequently as I am just on my email. So if you have questions, believe it or not, emailing me is just directly is the best way to get an answer. Um, yeah, and that's that. And next time we'll do it next month again, and I'm sure you guys have new questions then, and we will chat then. Okay, I think that's it. Thank you everyone for coming, and that's it. Let me see. End stream. And I hope these are automatically recorded. I think they are, but if they're not, I will tweak around with settings to make sure the next one is recorded. Yep.